If you had read Dracula or Frankenstein before seeing one of the many movies that Hollywood has put out in the past century, you may be a little confused, a little upset, or maybe even a little bit scared. A lot like these guys look right here. Well, let's face it, I can't think of very many stories that have inspired as many movies as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Unfortunately, no director has gotten it right so far, so let's take a look at their most popular and most obscure attempts. The very first two adaptations of these literary classics were the 1922 German vampire movie Nosferatu and the Edison Pictures film Frankenstein from 1910. Both were silent films, and both were great for being nearly a century old, but unfortunately they're not very true to the original work, so we must move on. Before I go any further, let me say that these two films are masterpieces, and I'm a great fan of them, but unfortunately, due to their success, they have forever changed the face of Frankenstein's monster and Count Dracula. The Frankenstein novel tells us that the monster was very tall and made up of several pieces of other bodies. Director James Whale had the right idea until he added large electrodes protruding from its neck and the 7 sizes too small suit we have all come to love. Did I mention that the monster was self-educated and spoke very well in the book? Unfortunately, Mr. Whale decided to have Boris Karloff growl instead.
I am Dracula.
Todd Browning's famous vision of the Count, portrayed by Bela Lugosi, whose Hungarian accent has become synonymous with Dracula, tried to stay true to the novel, but didn't. The Count starts out as an old man and slowly turns into a handsome aristocrat in the book, but Browning chose to ignore this backwards aging. I could spend all day on the character of Reinfeld and the lack of Lucy's slow death, which is more than half the novel, but time is short, so I'll move on. The 1950s saw a new wave of adaptations of both of these novels. Both monsters in these adaptations were played by the great Christopher Lee. While the Frankenstein movie created a monster who resembled the description in the book, the rest of the story moved very far from the novel. Lee's Dracula was a color update of the Lugosi Dracula, with more action and better special effects. It also had a lot more blood, but it still didn't get it right.
Hit it! If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
It seems as if every 20 years or so, these stories get a big budget makeover, because they were again recreated in the 1970s. Frankenstein saw a slew of parodies, both Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein and the British musical The Rocky Horror Picture Show, as well as serial icon Frankenberry. Count Dracula, on the other hand, became more family-friendly with serial icon Count Chocula, close friend or rival of Frankenberry, and Sesame Street's Count Von Count. It should be noted that Mel Brooks also made a very forgettable parody of Dracula in the 1990s called Dracula, Dead and Loving It.
Greetings! I am the Count. Do you know what? Look! Flowers! I will count them. One flower.
Again, 20 years later, in the 1990s, Hollywood finally tried to do right by Stoker and Shelley, releasing Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. While both were much more faithful to their inspiring stories, Dracula got it pretty close, where Frankenstein seemed at times to forget what story was the original. I will explain. In naming his film Mary Shelley's Frankenstein instead of simply Frankenstein, director Kenneth Branagh, who also plays Dr. Frankenstein, wanted to emphasize that he was being faithful to the literature. Robert De Niro's version of the monster did look more like a man and was able to talk, and things seemed to be going pretty good until Dr. Frankenstein makes a female monster, which in the book never happens, and causes the monster to kill everyone. So what is she doing in this film? It appears director Kenneth Branagh was a fan of the 1930s sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein. At least there wasn't a hunchback in this film. Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula starred one of my favorite actors as the Count, Gary Oldman. Aside from Keanu Reeves playing Jonathan Harker, I feel this is the best adaptation of the story we will ever get. Dracula is portrayed as a wolf, a bat, an old man, a young man, and mist in this story. Reinfeld is in the sanitarium, Lucy's death is drawn out as it should be, and Sir Anthony Hopkins is playing Van Helsing. The only thing this movie is lacking is the adventurous hunt for the Count that takes place at the end of the novel, but with his film getting so close, I can't be picky. So did I find my monsters? Kind of, but not really. I'll give the old and young Dracula portrayed by Gary Oldman a solid A for matching the description from the book. Kenneth Branagh's monster, played by Robert De Niro, gets a B- for trying to get it right, but I feel that he was too short and I just didn't believe his performance. Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff both get A's for being film legends, but their characters get a C- each. I just didn't believe they were the real deal. While Christopher Lee's Dracula was spooky as hell, he still gets a C- for reminding me too much of Bela Lugosi. His Frankenstein gets a B- for being the closest thing to the book back in the 50s. I'm not rating the spoofs in kids' shows, one, because there's too many of them, and two, most of them came from the 70s, and, well, the picture explains it all. Earlier I stated that the 1931 films damaged the face of these two beasts, and it's easy to see what I mean by simply creating a photo lineup of the characters from these adaptations and asking most anyone out on the street which one is Dracula and which one is Frankenstein. Notice I did not say Frankenstein's monster, as the name Frankenstein has somehow become synonymous with the monster. Well, 9 times out of 10, Lugosi and Karloff will be picked as Frankenstein and Dracula.